Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good day to you all. I would like to once again welcome all of our guests and all of our audiences that join us today through Zoom and also through YouTube streaming. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. So this webinar is co-organized by ASEAN University Network in partnership with ASEAN Human Development Organization and also the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards. My name is Frida Angelina, and I will be serving as your Master of Ceremony. This webinar is the fourth time we are hosting an ethics webinar, and I'm really happy to see a very huge enthusiasm for every ethics webinar that we have. And it's really such a big honor to hosting this kind of webinar. So in today's webinar, we are having a very interesting themes. So we all know that we're currently living in the era of massive technology, right? Digital technology itself has transformed the human experience, society, and organization at an extraordinary pace. That said, many believe that digital technology is indeed a crucial thing that needs a careful attention from us all. Given its benefit and also its threat, how should we position ourselves within this massive era of technology? So bringing this concern, our team on this fourth ethics webinar, we have a very interesting theme as seen on the slide. Today we're going to discuss about the ethical challenges of our digital world, specifically on how the ASEAN should manage personal data, social media, artificial intelligence, and the automation of work. In accordance with the theme, we currently have 5 speakers that they work daily with these issues, and they will share their insights and experiences that will help us all participants define our ethical positions. Once again, I would like to say thank you so much for joining this webinar. A little bit reminder, if anyone wants to share any point of view or comment during this webinar, it is very welcome. Feel free to leave your inquiries through the chat box on the Zoom chat box and also through the YouTube chat box. Okay, so before we get started, I would like to inform that the opinion expressed in a webinar are those of the authors only and may not necessarily represent the views of the organizing agencies or any other ASEAN institutions or bodies. Furthermore, I would like to inform that our webinar today will be recorded. And yeah, because we're about to start, for the Zoom audience, I would like to remind that please make sure that you are muted so you will not, so there is no disruption during the webinar. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Bob Audrey. He is a chairman of the Advisory Board of ASEAN Human Development Organizations, and today he will act as our moderator. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Bob to give the explanations of the flow of the webinar and also his welcoming remarks. Please, Dr. Bob.
Thank you, and welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to this seminar. We are talking about rapid changes in technology, and it's so rapid that if you've looked at the news this week, you see that already the Chinese government has set limits on how much time children can spend on video games. That's an ethical question. We've seen the questions about Facebook that gives power to the people to build their community, but actually they have these filter bubbles that are designed to increase engagement. So inflammatory content, extreme content gets the biggest visibility. That's an ethical question. Another ethical question is, what can companies adopt as ethical practices? And we've seen the European Union Data Protection Act or the California Consumer Protection Act. So it's very much in the news. What we want to do today with our speakers who work on these issues daily is to answer 5 questions. Should governments and companies control social media? Second, can technology companies use their power ethically? Third, how do universities prepare students and researchers to be ethical leaders? Number 4, how can citizens, workers, and professionals ensure transparency and use automation ethically? And number 5, how can we prepare for even faster technological development? As I said, our distinguished speakers deal with these problems in different ways. We have 5 speakers, so we will go fairly quickly. I believe now it's time for us to take a group photo, and then we can go to our first speaker. Over to you, Frida.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bob, for the welcoming remarks and also the introduction. Yes, it is really correct. Now, before we start with the discussion and also with the speakers, I would like to, before we jump to the photo session, I would like to introduce the 5 of our speakers that has been mentioned by Dr. Bob previously. So the 5 speakers that we are having right now, our first speaker is first we're having Dr. Nguyen Truong Phang. So he is Director, Institute of Information Technology, Vietnamese Academy of Science and Technology, and also a chair of ASEAN Subcommittee Microelectronics and Information Technology for the keynote address. And our second speaker, we are having Ms Forbes. She's the co-founder and the director of Al Asia Pacific Institute. And she's going to talk about the regional implications of data protections and IA. Our third speaker is Ms. Philippa Perfold. She's the head of AHDO Technology Committee. And today, she's going to talk about the impacts of IA and data technologies on career dynamics, wealth creation versus unemployment. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Ran Baek. She's the professor at Honam University, and also she is a director of Big Data Institute. And last but not least, we're having Ms. Erica Lusmana. She is a fresh graduate from Faculty of Economics and Business, majoring in accounting from University of Gajah Mada, Indonesia. And those are our distinguished speakers. And without any further ado, now I would like to invite all of our audiences to turn on their camera and join us in a photo session. With all the respects, I would like to invite everyone to turn on their camera. Is everyone ready? Yes, I think everyone is turning on their camera. So therefore, please keep posing. I will direct the photo sessions and I will count until 3, and our committee will take the picture of us. All right, everyone, get ready. 1, 2, 3. All right. Committee. Okay, I think now we can start. So without any further ado, I want to hand back the event to our moderator, Dr. Bob, to start the discussion. Please, Dr. Bob.
Thank you. So the way this discussion is going to flow is we're starting with ASEAN. We'll go through issues with companies as well, and then we'll be talking about education with our 5 speakers. So let's begin with Dr. Nguyen, and thank you for joining us. He's been very involved in the ASEAN coordination of debates. So it's not as if in the ASEAN region, we have nothing. Actually, quite a lot is going on. So let's have a look at that with Dr. Nguyen. Over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I would like to present to talk about the to start with the webinar, because I'm from the ASEAN policy making body, that is a committee of science, technology, innovation. So to present about the ethical issue of the digital world for ASEAN country. I start with the first by the talk about the SDI policy of ASEAN country, and then I go into detail about the digital technology, and go briefly with the ethical issue of digital technology from the ASEAN country, from ASEAN member state perspective, rather than the company, the enterprise, the company perspective. Yeah. So that is the structure of my talk. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah. This is my agenda. The first part, I try to give you the overview of how ASEAN science, technology, innovation policy and strategy relate from the current to the year of 2025 in accordance to the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint. Yeah, and to do that, we have the kind of the ASEAN community have the policy called the ASEAN Plan of Action in SDI. That's APASTI 2016 to 2025. So I go quickly through that. So, and the second part, I go into detail of the digital transformation of ASEAN country in for the ultimate goal of realizing the digital economic ASEAN economic community. And then at the end of my talk is about ethical issue of the digital ASEAN, specifically for the ASEAN economic community. Yeah, next please. Yeah, first of all, this is a structural overview of the ASEAN SDI. As you know, the world is undergoing the fourth industrial revolution. So in that case, the key element of the industrial revolution is the science, technology, innovation. So in ASEAN, we determine that SDI is the driver, will be the key element for the economic growth and enhancing our well-being of the region, as well as promoting our region integration. So as you know, the ASEAN organization structure is rather complex. I am from the COSTI, that is the Committee of SDI. That is the different from the more permanent organization structure, as is the ASEAN Secretariat. So as you know, it's the headquarters located in Jakarta, and the secretariat structure including the Secretary General and some supporting department like political security community, economic community. That's the IAC. That's what I focus in this talk. You mainly work with this department, and socio-cultural community and corporate affairs. That is the main supporting department within the permanent structure of ASEAN. That is secretariat. And for any policy and strategy made by ASEAN, this is by the concert among the ASEAN member states, IMS. So in the SDI policy I'm working on it, that's the SDI mainly decided by COSTI. As mentioned, that's the Committee of Science, Technology, and Innovation. And this COSTI set the direction, the coordinating activity among the member states, and creating the public awareness in region science technology activity. Next, please. Yeah, this is the structure of ASEAN, the permanent structure. That is the secretariat. Next, please. Yeah, and COSTI. I mentioned about the COSTI. That's the SDI policy making body in the ASEAN countries of the region. So the chairmanship of COSTI is hand in rotation basis among the member states. So often each member state, there are 10 member states, and each member state have represented by a chairman. So there is the highest ranking administrative officer of the science technology of the country. So usually that's a minister. So within the COSTI, there are 9 subsidiary groups, and I come from the number 5. That's the subcommittee of microelectronics and information technology, SCMIT. And the reason why I'm invited to this webinar, because this group working on digital technology, so related to what as a main topic we are discussing today, of the webinar. And next, please. So SDI of the policy of the region need to work in synchronization with the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint in 2025. So we have the reason need to use the STI, Science, Technology, Innovation, to promote the ultimate goal that we form a region of the ASEAN Economic Community. That is represented by 5 key interrelated characteristics. That is number 1, highly integrated and cohesive economy. Second, we improve our region competitiveness by making it more competitive, innovative, and dynamic. And more specifically, that's the number 4 in this characteristic. That's the productivity-driven growth, innovation, research and development, and technology commercialization. And C is enhance connectivity and sectoral cooperation among the member states in the region. It is banned by ICT, by e-commerce, and science technology. C2, C3, and C9 in the blueprint. And number 4, that's the resilient, inclusive, people-oriented, and people-centered ASEAN. And the last one is make ASEAN become a competitive entity in the global. Yeah, next please. Yeah, so SDI and AEC Blueprint 2025 is try to make it the region sustainable growth depending on its productivity, innovation, research, development, and technology commercialization. Yeah, in B4, that is, as I mentioned, that's we rely on technologies SDI to make it productive, driven growth, innovation, R&D, and technology commercialization. Next, please. Yeah. For the C9, that's the science technology. ASEAN countries need to use science technology to make to leverage and improve region productivity and competitiveness. Next, please. Yeah, and to realize that we have we call the action of the ASEAN plan of action for SDI from is a 10-year from 2016 to 2025. That's the capacity. Yeah, next, please. Yeah. Now, digital technology is a part of this SDI. It's now one of the key of the SDI. So I go a bit more about the digital transformation by digital technology in ASEAN. Next, please. Yeah. In IEC Blueprint 2025, the digital technology is recognized as a leverage to enhance trade and investment, provide an e-way business transform, promote good governance, and facilitate the use of green technology. So that we define 2 key elements in the blueprint are directly related to digital technology. That is ICT, information, technology and communication, and as well as e-commerce. Next, please. So that relates to numbers. The C characteristic in the blueprint. That's the number C2. That's information and communication technology. So ASEAN countries determine that ICT is a key driver in ASEAN economic and social transformation. We try to build a good infrastructure by providing pervasive connectivity among ASEAN member states and facilitate the creating of conducive business environment for trade, investment, and entrepreneurship. And also, we use the ICT to propel ASEAN toward the digitally enabled economy. It's a secure and sustainable and transformative. Yeah, next, please. So to improve, to strengthen our competitiveness of the regional economy, we try to promote the e-commerce. This e-commerce is determined as one of the key parts for our economy. By the global e-commerce is become the more vital for the global economy. So especially the retail sector. And in terms of the world trade, globalized and interconnected through ICT is the one of the key parts to promote the world trade. And e-commerce is not only the cross-border trade, but also facilitating the foreign investment through the supply of intermediary service. So the costing of ASEAN also define that e-commerce can support ASEAN towards a digitally enabled economy that is secure, sustainable, and transformative. Yeah, next, please. So, in terms of the digital technology, as I mentioned, I come from the subcommittee of microelectronics and information technology. So our subcommittee SCMIT mission is to try to develop and enhance the capability of the ASEAN member states in microelectronics and ICT, and also as a related area from the downstream to upstream technology. And at the moment, our subcommittee SCMIT determined that there are about 10 areas which we need to put the priority in this technology. That is microelectronics, multimedia communication technology, IoT, Internet of Things, big data, analytics and artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and robotics and automation. Yeah. So this talk is a webinar related to the number 4, number 5, and number 8. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah. Now I go to the very quickly about ethical issue. How?
About 5 minutes. So
yeah.
This is very important. We're seeing you're covering quite a lot of ground.
From the perspective of our region, of the government of the region, rather than the corporate perspective. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. So as I mentioned, the IAC blueprint and capacity, there are 5 key characteristics, and how the SDI can support these things. So in my opinion, we can use SDI and digital technology to support the number A, B, C, and E. In terms of the E, that's a resilient, inclusive, people-oriented, and people-centered ASEAN. I think it's a bit mixed. This is a technology risky factor in this part. Yeah. And SDI, especially for digital technology, is a key driver to realize IEC preventing A, B, C, and E. Please. Next, please. And modern technology now working on data and intelligent algorithm. That is AI, big data, cloud computing, IoT, and robotics. And ethical challenge for ASEAN is try to ultimately transform to digital ASEAN. That's it, empower the positive side of technology application. Also, we have to control the potential misbehavior or violation on the cyberspace. It refers to ethic code and framework imposed on human in the real world. Yeah. So in my recommendation for dealing with ethical issues, try to lay the foundation ethical conduct. That is for members say that's a culture, individual conduct and laws and regulation. In terms of international, that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations. Yeah. And we try to identify the ethical issue from the government perspective. And also we focus on values and norms we preserve, no matter in the real world or in the cyberspace. So typical value or norms in our society is responsibility, privacy, accountability, autonomy, safety. They are the later, I think we mention more in the next speakers, but they are the, we call the non-functional requirement for the system, IT system or digital system. Yeah, next please. Yeah. So in the current digital development methodology as a movement, as I come from the technology field, the very few companies consider.
Okay, so we have a bit of a technical freeze here. I think Dr. Nguyen may come back to us, but let me see. Dr. Nguyen? Okay, so I think we'll come back in the questions so that he can finish the ideas of the ethical issues in his slides. But from there, I'm going to go on to our second speaker, and then we'll have a short time for questions. So we'll come back to Dr. Nguyen again. Let me move on then to Kelly Forbes. Now, what you've seen with Dr. Nguyen is there's a huge area and scope for ASEAN, and in which there's discussion, coordination, meetings, etc. Now we're going to go to someone who has devoted her time and her profession to actually dealing with some of the legal issues of data protection, artificial intelligence, and Kelly Forbes has great experience in the legal aspects. So Kelly, can you tell us what you're working on? I know that you're working on a number of issues for Asia Pacific in the legal protection and legal implications.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you to all the organizations here who are hosting this conversation, and Bob, to you for the invitation to contribute to this topic here. So today I'm going to be walking us through this conversation on regional implications on data protection and AI. And I think we all touch on a lot of the ethical challenges that we have in this digital world. And AI is very much a large foundation to a lot of these challenges due to its capacity to either amplify or verify a lot of these issues. And so when we speak about data protection and these challenges we have with privacy, most of us are quite familiar with the recent challenges on that, specifically involving some of the big tech companies and so on. And AI is very much attached to this conversation. So we can't have a conversation about data protection and privacy without considering the impact of AI. So to make a start on this conversation, I thought I'll give you some introduction about this conversation on trustworthy artificial intelligence. And so what it means to say trustworthy AI, and probably many of you have heard different terms in the industry, you have responsible AI or ethical AI. And so trustworthy AI is very much linked to this idea of how can we develop trust in the AI system. And we have these movies here all linked to, fiction scenarios where we have examples of an artificial intelligence either becoming more powerful or more intelligent than us, or bringing impact or, some implications that come to the very core of what it means for us to be humans. And some of you are probably familiar with some of these movies. There's a few good ones and not so good ones. But the important thing is that, there's a lot of discussion about this idea of superintelligence, whether they use the term AGI, artificial general intelligence, whether that is even possible. And there's a lot of conflicting ideas around that. And the reality is that we are still very far from a scenario like that, if that's even ever possible. But the challenges that we have now are very real, and they involve, we are already daily using AI systems to help us choosing the movie that we're watching, to help us with social media, connect with work and friends, and even more in the last 2 years with the impact of COVID. So, and with that, we also have a lot of these ethical challenges as a foundation to a lot of questions that we have. And so the idea of trustworthy AI here is very much, we and the Institute work with this idea of, coming from Europe, this definition that involves, can we look at an AI system and consider it to be lawful, ethical, and robust, right? So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but of course, data and privacy, they touch on, I think, every aspect of these columns here, and, including robustness, whether we can consider that system to be safe and secure, whether our data is protected, how our privacy is going to be affected. And so there's a lot of questions around this. And what we're going to do today is look at this from a legal lenses first. So we're going to walk through a few of the agreements that are available in the region and some of the developments. As Bob mentioned in the beginning, this is an evolving industry. And, just this week, we had some new developments from China as well around privacy. And so we're going to look at some of these agreements on a more international level in the region, the APEC region. And this is very important because if you were to take one thing out of this whole conversation here today, is the fact that AI is transnational. It travels, it crosses borders. So even though we might have a perfect, local framework or a system in place to deal with these challenges, unless we actually work with collaboration and cooperation on an international level, we are still open for a lot of breaches and a lot of challenges that will be quite unexpected. So what we have here is essentially it's the main agreements that we have had recently. involving this region. And if we look here at the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was just signed last year. 2 of these main agreements have been signed last year. And actually one is between Singapore and Australia. And the other one involves at least 10 of the ASEAN countries and 15 countries in general in the region. And this is a very important agreement because it's the first one where we have China signing and contributing to this conversation as well. And we all, if we are considering the impact of AI in the region and worldwide, we can't have a conversation without including the impact that China is having on this. So it's very important, and it's very good that, you know, China is joining this international conversations as well and coming to speak, you know, in this, contributing to this agreement here. And so these are agreements that, you know, are legally binding, are on international space. And there's a few different countries signing and participating in this conversation, and they regulating the industry in different aspects. So they are, you know, regulating how data flow will happen in the region, privacy and other issues. So countries are coming together to discuss this. And then on the other level, we can move to the next slide, please. And so what we have next is this comparison here between a few of the ASEAN countries on how they are performing overall in terms of legal principles and ethical frameworks, specifically in the privacy sector in AI. And so we can clearly see here that Singapore is very much taking the lead on this. You know, it scores 0.814. It ranks first on this conversation, and then, you know, followed by Malaysia and a lot of the other Asian countries that are, you know, are still quite behind in comparison to these countries that are leading. They're all ranging from 0.5 to 0.6 there. So we definitely need a lot of more incentive that for these other countries in the region to, you know, get more attached to this conversation and have more developments around these challenges. And so this also highlights a bigger issue that we have in AI, not just AI, but all emerging technologies as a whole, and how the world is, you know, essentially moving towards these fast-paced developments. And then what we have is the concern around digital divide. So, and this very much highlights that it's the fact that, you know, more developed countries are having more access to innovation and technology. They also automatically thinking about the ethical impact of that. So they have frameworks in place, and they having conversations and thinking about how they can adapt the legal system to this new digital impact. While the other countries are still, you know, quite behind, and the technology is pushing them, you know, apart even more. So the inequality really comes to light with that. So that is a concern that needs to be highlighted and needs to be, you know, considered. There are, you know, large organizations in the world right now working on this. You know, United Nations, UNESCO are doing a lot of work around these conversations here and thinking about how we can bring technology, AI to other countries so that we don't increase this inequality in a way. But we can see here, so Singapore is very much leading this conversation. And so if we move to the next slide now, we're going to talk about, so what is Singapore doing differently, and how they're approaching these challenges, right? And this table that we have here is part of a recent report that we have published as part of the Institute that has compared a few countries in the region. And for that time, we have focused on China, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. And you know, we have considered the frameworks on AI, the principles, and how they're approaching this conversation. And so I won't spend too much time here on these definitions of principles, what they mean, but I think there's 2 main ones here and important to this conversation that we should consider. And the first one is, of course, privacy, right? So we can see that Singapore has been very active, involved in these concerns around privacy. And so is China, right, with the recent developments there. It's, China also has a very robust, one of the most robust privacy systems in the world. It has recently, with these new developments, and it's being said that, the position of where China is going is going to be very similar to what we have in Europe around the GDPR, which most of you could be quite familiar with. Europe has been sort of leading around the world this discussion for a few years now. And so we might be able to expect something more similar in this region with these, more robust developments from countries such as Singapore and China. And then also I wanted to touch on this other principle here, which is called human centricity. And this is a very important principle, and many frameworks around the world have considered this to encourage the AI developments as well as the implementations in AI for the industry. And it's very much linked to the fact that are we developing these machines, AI, for humans to improve our lives? So humans are very much in the core, it must be in the core of these developments. And as well as we always keeping a human in the loop. So what that means is even when the system is running and performing and doing what we want it to be doing, we still have a human checking the system and, fully trained and aware of those implications to be able to detect that and mitigate when necessary. We've seen a lot of recent cases involving bias, discrimination, how tech companies can use AI to track people, control data, privacy, all those issues, and having people more involved in how those systems are operating and understanding can stop that and bring that to light much earlier so that, we can perhaps mitigate that in a much better way as well. So I will stop here for now, and I will pass to Bob for any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. This has been very interesting, very focused, and I'm sure we have some questions for you. So we're going to make a pause for questions when we have two speakers, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end when all of the speakers have spoken. So please put up your questions in the chat box that's reserved for you. But unfortunately, we had the technical problem with Dr. Nguyen. Are you back with us, Dr. Nguyen? Is he still offline?
Yeah.
There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, Dr. Nguyen. So first question for you, because you weren't able to finish what you were talking about in terms of the ethical challenges, right, for ASEAN. So maybe you can summarize in an answer format.
Yeah.
What's the key message that you want to say about the ethical challenges for ASEAN? Then we'll come over to Kelly.
Yeah. The thing in my presentation is try to compare with what the US is doing with the with the China is doing, especially like Kelly just said, is some and even you mentioned in your introduction recent activity from the Chinese government dealing with the privacy and the sharing the common value among the society, right? In some internet big tech of China, and I will even mention with the OECD. Recently, OECD introduced some kind of 45 countries sign on the legal instrument within the OECD countries, and I think ASEAN country, the reason as well as the 10 member states should follow and look at those three, the OECD, the China, and the US. And to balance and make the adapt to the culture, in the custom, approach to the Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Just on that point, so basically, you know the phrase "control your destiny" or somebody else will control your destiny, and we get the feeling in ASEAN that you've got these two giant powers, the China system, and they're very advanced in AI, for example, but also gaming, very advanced. So they have very different laws. And then you have the US, which is coming in with very commercial marketing ethical challenges. Do you get the feeling that we're sort of stuck in between these two powers, or that we have our own system and framework that we can deal with it so that we can control our own destiny? What's your feeling on that, Dr.?
Yeah, I think ASEAN country should make their own destiny, but we adapt and we learn from the experience of those two powers, as from China, the US, and as well as from the Europe. I mentioned the USA, Europe. I think we can learn from them. But I think that ASEAN country, I think in terms of the culture, we are more close to the China than to the Valley. So sometimes I think that the action from the framework we've been for the Asian country, I think somehow closer to China approach rather than to the Western countries. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have some quite a few questions online, and so I'm going to turn to Kelly with one of the questions. Now, Frida, you're tracking these questions. Can you pick a question for Kelly, please?
Yes, Dr. Bob. We have a very interesting questions here for Ms. Kelly. So the question is more to the role of IA and their effect on the unemployment. So the questions that we have here is, how can IA support the national economy? Would it be affecting unemployment, particularly in low-income countries? That's our questions.
Thank you. Very good question. Thank you, Freda. And I think this is very attached when I was going through Singapore and explaining what is Singapore doing right that is being highlighted in the region. It's very attached to this fact as well, that they finding this correct balance between innovation, but also encouraging this, upskilling and retraining of people, which is so important for this, fourth industrial revolution that we're living in. And so at the same time that we can expect that AI is very much challenging a lot of the social core of our work, how we currently work, and we're already seeing this with COVID as well. We can expect it to see that more and more as technology advances. But there's also so much potential to, if we can prepare people appropriately for this future of work, if they can receive the necessary training, upskilling, education, which is what Singapore has been doing with a lot of different programs, Skills Future and a lot of different initiatives there, which are opening, the doors for people to be able to be retrained if they perceive that the current tasks or the current job is likely to be displaced by technology, or just becoming aware that, this is happening, now and in the next few years. And at the same time, we must embrace this process because it also brings a lot of opportunities, for especially the young generation.
Thanks. Kelly, I have a question. We know each other a little bit, and I want to know, why are you devoting your life to protecting AI and these kind of issues? And can you tell us where you're from? Because you're maybe sitting in Australia, but that's not where you're from. So tell us a little bit about, and then we'll pick a question for Dr. Nguyen.
Sure, Bob, sure. So so I think you probably know a bit of this background, but for the benefit of everyone. So I'm originally from Brazil, but I have lived probably for the last 15 years around the Asia Pacific region. I've lived in about 4 countries here. And so I have a legal background, and when I transitioned from that background and I got involved with working with emerging technologies and startups in the industry. And that's when I've realized that there's so many of these challenges that we are currently facing, and we're still something that we're all seeking answers around the ethical. And you, Bob, are very familiar with the ethical challenges, and beyond the ethical challenges, we have social and legal implications there. And so there's very much this need for independent people to be working in this space, bringing these conversations together. So something that, a few of us have noted here in the conversation is the fact that a lot of this privacy, AI, technology concerns, they traveled across borders. And so I believe collaboration is very, very important on an international level, right? We do have larger organizations, UNESCO, United Nations working on this, but I also see that there's so much potential for us here in this region. Like it was mentioned, we are very near China. There's been a lot of innovation processes in the region. And so if we can get this right, and if we can, have the right incentives for the region, I believe that we can actually really thrive as a region together.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Nguyen, building on that, ASEAN is often criticized for talking a lot, but not having an ability to implement. Now, part of that is the reason about the ASEAN setup, as we know. It's not like the European Union where you can pass a law, but do you feel hopeful, and how confident are you that we are progressing to be able to manage these innovations in technology in ASEAN?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is a very big question for the reason, not only, it's a challenge for us, in my opinion, ASEAN, the reason is try to follow the model of the European community, I think. I go about I think 10 to 20 years, in my opinion. And the thing is, in the ASEAN country, there's no leader. Like in the Europe, you have the Germany, the power, like Germany, France, the UK. Even though now the Brexit, the UK is separate from the
right.
At least they have some power in terms of the economic power and technological power. But in reason now, I think in ASEAN, the leader of the pack is usually Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. And we are just in terms of the reason, in terms of the war. So I think that is the weak point for the reason. Try to push our and also I think the gap between the advanced countries like Singapore, it is lower end. I think it's quite far in terms of technology, the economy, as well as the other issue like the social. So I think that's the biggest problem for this reason. But I hope that ICT, the technology can make it more in terms of more cohesive and develop together and integrate the whole region economy as a one. As you integrate together, I think ASEAN become more powerful in terms of economy as a political of the region and in terms of global scale. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. So, Kelly, do we have Frida? You have another question for Kelly, I believe.
Yes, Dr. Bob. We have the questions for Ms. Forbes. The question is, what if there appears to be a contradiction in the application of privacy and accountability, like in the case of China? How can this be addressed? Which should take precedence? What do you think about that?
Thank you. That's a very good question as well, and I think and that is why it's very important that this concept that I've been touching on around collaboration and on an international level. We do have to be mindful that a lot of these definitions and concepts and processes and how each country approaches these challenges is always going to be different, and it's very challenging to find a uniform approach to this. The challenge that we have in this region, it's quite unique comparison to Europe, for example. They have been, they being able to implement the GDPR. They're doing a lot of work on regulation in AI as a whole region. They much more unified in terms of culture, background, history, politics. And so this region, we do have the challenge that we are much more diverse region, right? And how certain countries approach these challenges can be very different from other countries, particularly in Asia in comparison to the Western world. This is again where Singapore is really well placed because they very much sit between these two worlds and they're very good at balancing these differences. Right, we do have the challenge that, you know, other countries like China, they approach certain definitions on privacy very differently, and these AI systems as well. And so we do have to respect that, and we have to, you know, try to work with them through these agreements that I have mentioned here earlier today, you know, in the form of coming to a consensus in what this can mean, you know, in coming together as a region.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. That's an important point. So, you know, in ASEAN, we're sort of non-aligned. We have these two very different systems with a lot of what was called hard power. The EU is very strong in soft power, which is the influence. And we have to use both here as well, because I think technologically we are advancing very quickly as we can see. Okay, so what we've seen so far is that the sort of big picture legal framework, the ASEAN framework of dealing with technology. I'd like to turn now to our next speaker, and we'll take two speakers and then come back for questions. Philippa Penfold is, I'd like to mention that she's head of the ASEAN Human Development Organization Technology Committee. So but also she's someone who has been working in the field of, with companies in the field of HR and organizational change and the impact of technology on those changes a great deal. So now at the company level, let's ask Philippa Penfold to sort of tell us what is going on in companies.
Thanks very much, Bob.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Great to be with you today. I'm happy to be talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on work and career dynamics. Pardon me. We're going to look through three key areas. We'll look at how government decisions influence work opportunities and the shape of the labour force. We'll look at the business choices and how those choices that business make influence career opportunities. And we'll also have, and we'll dig down into the work design of those. And finally, we'll look at the tertiary education, or education in general, but primarily the tertiary education, and how that is influencing work and career dynamics across the ASEAN region. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to walk through is just 4 of our ASEAN countries. I'll start with Singapore and we'll move clockwise. As Kelly mentioned, Singapore is #1 in a number of areas. Not only is it #1 from an investment point of view, so they invested 150 million 5 years ago and have just recently announced another $50 million investment. And this is under their Smart Nation initiative, which includes a national AI strategy and cybersecurity strategy. Because in spite of coming out #1, as Kelly presented on her last slide for privacy, they still had the breach of Prime Minister Lee's health records. So while they may be #1, they've still got room to improve. They are also disproportionately impacted. So it's, as a nation state, it has a large percentage of knowledge workforce, and they will be impacted by artificial intelligence, in fact, more than any other country in ASEAN. So it's not just because they have the funding that they are looking at investing so much in changing the way that their workforce is able to embrace artificial intelligence. 28%, I believe, is the impact, 26% is the impact on Singapore compared to other countries. Malaysia has done something quite different. And for a number of years, Malaysia has been encouraging foreign direct investment. Just recently, Microsoft has announced a $1 billion investment to set up a data center in Malaysia. This, and I'm sure people from Malaysia are very familiar with the techno parks and cyber parks, cyber towns that have cropped up in Malaysia, with the government accepting company partnerships and funding foreign direct investment through partnerships. This changes the work availability, the landscape, and in part shares the responsibility of the government of educating the workforce with these large organizations. Microsoft naturally will have a large impact in the development of people, of the labor force. Vietnam this year launched the National Strategy on R&D and the application of artificial intelligence. And I was really encouraged to see one part that came out very strongly. They said AI should be concerned with the socio-economic development challenges and goals. This is a direct, addressing the ethical dimension directly in their national strategy. Vietnam is, I'm sure everybody in Vietnam, including our listeners, are very aware that there is a huge disparity between those that have access, stable access to the internet, no pun intended, Dr. Nguyen, but the accessibility of being able to use these tools varies significantly. And I feel the Vietnamese government has a strong understanding of the implications, the socio-economic implications and impact that artificial intelligence can have on its population. Pardon me. Similarly, in 2020, the national strategy for AI, for the development of AI, coming out of Indonesia, they mentioned that AI that is safe and widely beneficial. Now, widely beneficial is an interesting concept if you're thinking about Indonesia. Only 56% of people in Indonesia have access to the internet, and less have access to stable and unlimited internet that they can afford. The affordability, the stability, and the accessibility are impacted. And with the exception of Singapore, which is and Brunei Darussalam, there is no country that is above 60% to be able of internet access. So decisions made by government do shape the labour landscape and the standards for which companies embrace artificial intelligence, the use of their citizen data, as well as the opportunities for jobs. Next slide, please. So as you saw on the last slide, 83% of ASEAN are only in the early stage of AI development as of 2020. So we are a long way behind a number of other regions. If you come from one of the top 4 industries, you might find that 83% quite surprising. We saw that a study in 2018 saw that 28 million fewer workers are required with technology impacting work by 2028 for the same amount of impact. This doesn't mean that 28 million people are going to lose their jobs. And Kelly touched on this very well around how we need to reach out and reskill for tasks, not just for whole jobs. And it'll be the parts of jobs that are impacted. But the choices made by business regarding how they use and apply AI-powered tools have far-reaching consequences for the work opportunities and the employee experience. Business model, of course, how the company makes money may have changed. Kelly raised Netflix as a good example. Once upon a time, they made money a very different way to the way they make it now. And with the advent of the rise of artificial intelligence, they've been able to fine-tune their business model and their operations. The two we're going to have a closer look at are work design and employee interaction. Next slide, please. So one area that has been under study probably only for the last 4 to 5 years is the area of algorithmic management. Effectively, algorithmic management is the management of our employees via algorithms. It is one of the most disruptive forms of technological change being implemented in the workforce today. Let's just go through the definition. Algorithms, which we know are what powers artificial intelligence, it's the formula, if you will, of how to read the data. So the algorithms are given the responsibility for making and executing decisions affecting labor, affecting people, thereby limiting human involvement and oversight. I can see a disproportionate impact on a number of organizations and industries across ASEAN because we tend to have a large percentage of lower skilled people, and artificial intelligence is more suited to a lot of what they do, particularly in the high-end manufacturing. We've seen Amazon being impacted by this significantly for the same reasons. There has been the studies since 2015, and the most recent one, which I read just 2 weeks ago, by the Future of Work Institute through Curtin University. They had a look at all the recent research and conducted research of their own, and the results are overwhelming. The impact and the effect of algorithmic management on employees is disproportionately negative. Low job satisfaction, lower life satisfaction, reduced engagement in work. So there's significant scope for companies and for human resources to review the use of AI, not just by HR, but across their entire business, because we need to understand how algorithmic management is influencing work design and impacting employees, or many of the gains that we have made over the last 2 decades in employee engagement and through improved employee experience may well be lost as artificial intelligence ramps up. Next slide, please. And we can see here how it is also influencing the interaction between people. The full influence of artificial intelligence upon human interactions in the workplace is yet to unfold. But we need to think about how AI is now shaping our behavior and the way we interact. Artificial intelligence can manipulate human behavior. We've seen it in the consumer space, in the social media space. The same is true in the workplace. The purpose that it is being used to manipulate human behavior, I don't believe we understand well enough, both between employees and employees, employees and managers, and employees and their companies, usually through HR. This will have a huge impact on the dynamics in our workplace, but also what HR need to focus on to be able to ensure solid labour engagement and productivity. Last slide, please. And of course, to do this, we need to reskill. I'm sure you're all aware of the World Economic Forum saying we need to reskill 50% of people by 2025. We are actually a long way from that. And that the top skills are not directly technologically related, they're actually human skills. But if we look at it within the ASEAN context, access and opportunity is limited. With the exception of Singapore, the next country in ASEAN is Thailand at 51% of people with tertiary education. Most of ASEAN is in the low 30s, and then there's 3 countries, Laos, Cambodia and Myanmar, who are in the teens. Where should the responsibility for reskilling come from? Government, business? Today, what we're seeing is a lot of individuals taking responsibility of doing it themselves, but that is also compounding the difference between the haves and the have-nots. With education facilities being slow to change, how are we going to teach these new skills? Oftentimes when I talk to people in HR about learning about AI, they think they need to code. You only need to learn that to a point that you can work with an AI person or an AI developer. Working in AI or coding is very different to working with AI. A finance professional, for example, only needs to understand artificial intelligence sufficiently to work with it effectively. At this moment, most professionals outside the technological space do not have enough knowledge to be and skill set to work effectively and safely with artificial intelligence in their professional area. Thank you. I'll open for questions. Mute Bob, sorry, Bob. It's okay.
Thank you. Sorry. It's great to hear what's going on at the company level. So let me ask first, if I'm working in a company, because many of our audience are still students, so going into the workplace, if I'm working and particularly if I'm in a management position, I have to decide something, what are the concrete ethical dilemmas that I'm most likely to find? Where am I going to bump up against some of these ethical issues? That just to give an idea, right? Because you've seen them, right?
Yes, I think the most important one, well, there's two. One goes with the other. First of all, we are not challenging artificial intelligence sufficiently in the workplace. If we have a tool tell us to do something, silly, what we don't think is appropriate, we rarely challenge it. We rarely seek to understand why it is giving us a certain recommendation, why it is setting office in a certain direction. I think there is a responsibility of all individuals to challenge the technology, to challenge the algorithm, if you will, to understand what is going on inside and why that instruction is being given. Oftentimes I have found that instruction is erroneous, that it can be improved. So simply doing what the technology tells you because the technology does is insufficient. To do that, we need mechanisms within business and within HR to do that. Generally speaking, there isn't. I'm sure a lot of the students have used the online artificially intelligent powered recruitment tools. There is no way of asking that tool why you did not get a job. There's no way of challenging it. And I think we need those challenging venues and channels to be able to really get in and question. The other thing from an employee perspective, when we see new jobs, we often see we'll have a job description. It will tell you who you're working with. I would like to see a network map or a description of what tools you are using and how it is influencing and directing you in your job, in the same way that we see who are you accountable for from a managerial perspective. So looking at our jobs from a collective intelligence point of view, both the human and the artificial, and the transparency around both is as clear one for the other for people when they're choosing where to work.
Thank you. Frida, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, Dr. Bob. Thank you so much, Ms. Forbes, for the explanations. We have interesting questions from our YouTube audience. So they wonder what mental or cognitive tasks can be enhanced or negatively impacted by artificial intelligence.
Oh, that's a big question. We need another 2 minutes that we've got left. I'll be honest, I'd need to go back and do some research to find exactly the ones that are being impacted the most. As anyone knows me, knows that the science is big and I don't want to just feed pop science off to you. I think that in terms of, so is the question really around bias? Is that what's
I think they're looking at the
it?
cognitive tasks. So what exactly where does it impact the mental or cognitive task using AI? I mean, you've got machine learning, for example. So
let's just, we need to go into the different types of algorithms and what they do to be able to answer this question properly, to understand how different algorithms perform different types of cognitive simulated tasks. But if we think about the tasks or the skills that we are using, the more human skills in the workplace, remember the technology can only do, it may look cognitive, it may appear cognitive to us, but actually it's not thinking in the way that we do. It's still a mathematical formula at the end of the day, maybe an extremely advanced mathematical formula, but our concept of cognition for humans versus artificial intelligence is quite different. So until we can sort of get into that, it is a very difficult and complicated, a complex question to answer. I think that the most important one to think about though is when we're the ones that can, the learning system, so if we're talking at deep learning, for example, how they are changing their recommendations based on the data that they're being fed, based on what they are learning. That's very much in the way that we would work, but it would depend on that data, on the sources of data. Too big a question for the 2 minutes.
Okay, we'll come back.
Great question. I'd love it for later. I might have to do a post on that one. Thank you for whoever asked such a great question.
Thank you, Philippa. Okay, we've talked about companies and there would be a lot more to say, obviously, and the whole future of work is going to be impacted by technology in general, but also universities. So I'd like to go to our next speaker, Dr. Ran Baik. who's the director of the AI Big Data Institute in South Korea, and get her opinion on what's going on in research and education, because think about some of these technologies, the science of these technologies starts in the universities. So Professor Ranbai, can you tell us what's going on in universities, how you see this going forward?
Thank you, Bob. I just shared my slide.
Yeah.
Good morning. This is Ranbai from Honan University at Gwangju in Korea. My presentation will be related to some topic of AI in Korea, such as change in education, society, and technology. My talk will be the following 5 areas. First part is ethic decision versus speed of AI technology development. What is the gap between AI implementation and ethics? And second part, definition of a position amid conflicting geopolitical powers, how to be competitive with developed countries. A third part, preparation for even faster technology development. First, how to manage technological singularity. Fifth one is I conclude what is teaching AI and data technology in Korea. At the first time area, I want to consider the developer speed artificial intelligence, which is advancing very rapidly. So when we should ethic decision be made in the development of this technology? There are 2 questions about the technology and ethics. If a new technology emerges, when do we ethic issues arise? If economic compensation is provided for ethic issues, are we taking ethic issues more seriously? In this case, for example, consider the case of buying personal information. If we were to ask the above 2 questions combined together, the question could be stated as follows. Has technology changed faster than you can make ethic decision and define the boundary? The answer is definitely yes. The technology is also advancing faster. Okay, back to the history. The answer is following. We learned the lesson and the wisdom from history. As seen in the first and second and third industrial revolution, the economy is developed first, and issues such as ethical decisions are always followed. Second part, region, the technical is bounded to change all fields of the society, education, art, economy, and many instant problems are bounded to arise. Last region. This is, yes. First of all, it is rare for human to be prepared for the technology to be developed in the future. Oh, this is just some kind of what about the artificial intelligence in ethics. In 2019 and 18, the government in Korea has issued executive orders emphasis the ethic aspect along with emphasis to developing artificial intelligence technology for global companies. You can see I think in the AI technology, we have some mistake in artificial intelligence. If you look at the eras of artificial intelligence, there was a case of a Microsoft chatbot, Tay, in the United States. And there was also a chat service called Iruda in Korea. The problems here include the controversy over the information bias, unknowing leaking of the information without the user consent, and the invasion of privacy. This side effects and the harms of artificial intelligence technology, which was thought to help our lives, are getting more serious day by day, and our anxiety and worries are constantly increasing. This is some example Korean questionnaire. The following slide, the question is, who should regulate artificial intelligence? 71% of response is regulation related to AI should be done by government or public bodies to ensure the safe development. As 27% of companies should self-regulate. 20, individuals who use the artificial intelligence response have to take. From this result, we can see the various opinions were found in the question. Given ASEAN diversity, how can we region define its own position in the face of a conflict geopolitical power? Let's take a look at the contents of the question. Do you think the areas with greater potential? What do you think about it? First of all, if you look at the geopolitical environment and the characteristic of each country, the time of applying new technology is somewhat slower than that of the Western region. But I think it is an area that developed with great potential. First, the ASEAN region has a large population. The power of data comes from the population. Second region, the demographic of ASEAN countries include a lot of young people. So it can be seen that there is a lot of potential. A large number of young people can develop and apply new technology. The next question, how can we prepare for technological advance? I would like to think about what is the most fundamental way to prepare for the future new technology. To prepare for this new technology, first part, we need to understand the new technology. And secondly, it is necessary to actively apply and use them in each specialized area of expertise. What does it mean to understand a new technology? It starts with education. In order to educate new technology, it is very important to have the people who can teach and the curriculum. This will be the last question. How to manage singularities of new technology? Let's take the singularity of technology in a hypothetical scenario. In a situation where technological growth is uncontrollable and irreversible, if a hypothetical point in human civilization is brought about by unpredictable changes, how will we manage it? What is the key to solve that method? Have you thought about it? Ironically, it is the human who hold the key. Human creativity as an excellent facilitator through technology is the key. Last, I will introduce on artificial intelligence and data technology education in Korea. This is one example on implementing artificial intelligence in the education field. First of all, 3 elements are applied in the curriculum. First, it emphasizes mathematical and logical thinking and understanding of data. Second, it refers to basic software skills, and most of them are taught in Python. Third, it is emphasized knowledge in the area each major field. So there are the competency the students will achieve in AI education as the follow. Various ability such as data collection, data analysis, problem solving ability, so on, can be included. Then if we design anything in AI education, as shown in the figure, if ethical elements are applied to artificial intelligence technology, centered on the interconnection of each area, it can be provided so that artificial intelligence ethics can be realized. If you can compare over the future AI education in learning functions and upcoming, we introduce the prediction that AI of the future can change. I will close my presentation with the expectation of wisdom that AI education can further develop ethic elements together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Doctor. Let me begin with a question for you. Do you believe that students in higher education must have courses in artificial intelligence, big data, etc.? Would you say that should be almost a requirement? What's your opinion?
Just in our university, I already innovation to make up the curriculum for first freshmen to learn the Python and big data control. So they have 2 courses in the mandatory. So we have and then we just think about some major. They just applied some major, second grade. They can use that one.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you. Frida, do we have questions from the audience, please? I think I see some.
Yes, Dr. Bob.
Okay.
We have the questions, but the question comes with context. So first of all, the audience share their views regarding the material explained by Dr. Baik. So they believe that government have high impact in imposing regulations about privacy, data collection, and artificial intelligence, right? The way companies have regulations to bow down with because I believe that different countries has different regulations for how the companies bow down to the government regulations regarding the data collections, privacy, and artificial intelligence. So the question is, what do you think about that point? Should all companies bow down to justice while breaking the rights of privacy, or should we put human rights on top of everything? Did you get the questions, or should I repeat once again?
Oh, so in this AI is just implementation in the society and the company, it is very hard. Do you know, just when we just use the data, we can make some errors here in the Iruda case. So in this case, we have some advanced AI metaverse, something like that. And also, yes, some regulation is a very hot issue. But we just conclude what it is. We cannot do that. We just follow and then we recorrection for regulation. That is very important, but this is ongoing right now.
Yeah. So she was asking also, and this is an interesting point. So what's the guideline, the ultimate guideline? Is it the human rights declarations that should guide us, or is it some other form?
Yes, we have some 2 years we have announced some execution for the ethics, but there is some kind of the guideline for global company, because they just compete in the world. Right. So, but that is, doesn't have some detailed regulation, but that is just a huge just outline for that.
Okay, so this brings me back to my earlier question: what should students learn in universities? Do you believe that ethics should be taught to all students in universities?
Oh, that is very important. So actually, so we settled down the AI and big data department right now. So I just gave some AI ethics course in the freshman. That is very important. They just pair the AI implementation. That is very important ethics. So we already set up one.
Okay, great. Thank you. It sounds like your university's really taking on the challenge, and we could learn a lot from what you're doing. So we go from what's going on in universities. Thank you, Dr. Ranbaik, and we'll come back to you with the panel questions. But let's move on now to the student level. And Erica Lesmana is a graduate student with a bachelor in accounting from University of Gajah Mada. And she's thought a lot about these things, and she's going to give us the student's point of view, and I think with some concrete cases. Over to you, Erica.
Okay, thank you so much, Bob. And good afternoon to all the panelists, the moderator, committee, and audience. I am Erica Lesmana, really honored to be here as one of the representatives from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. And I will be speaking about the ethical opportunities and challenges from youth perspective, which will be divided into 3 main topics. So committee, please. Yeah. So I will cover these 3 topics. The first one is the social media usage landscape, and the second one is the key opportunities and as well as challenges, and the third one is what we can do as youth. So moving on to the next slide. So moving on to the first agenda, we are living in an era where probably capturing moments using our phones is more important than actually living these moments with whoever is beside us. So indeed, globally, social media has been embedded in our digitalized society more than ever. Next slide. There are 4.33 billion social media users around the world today, which accounts for approximately 55% of the total populations. And talking about their behavior, a typical global internet user now spends an average of 7 hours per day online, which is in total around 12 trillion hours in 2021 alone. Now, if you are looking at a more micro perspective, across the Southeast Asia youngsters, social media is their main online activity. So next slide. People aged 16 to 24 spend roughly 60% of their waking lives alone or online, an average of more than 10 hours a day using internet connected devices. And social media is their #1 online activity. So how about in Indonesia? In Indonesia, YouTube, Instagram, and WhatsApp are the most popular social media platforms. So there are 170 million social media users in Indonesia by January 2021, which accounts for 61.8% of the total populations, with YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram become the top 3 most popular social media platforms. So the question here is that, does the trend presented earlier of the social media usage present an opportunity or challenges? So the answer is both of them. So talking about the challenges first, we have social media hacks or hacking. In Indonesia, there's a case that personal data of at least 279 million Indonesians were allegedly leaked and sold on a hacker platform called Raid Forums in May 2021. Information related to the leakage of population data first surfaced on the social media, and it is claimed to be from the Healthcare and Social Security Agency, or Indonesia called BPJS Kesehatan. I also have my personal case. So my friend had his own Instagram account hacked. And furthermore, a lot of his edited photos with some accusations got leaked in his account. Moving on to the next slide, we also have cyberbullying. So the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, it defines the cyberbullying as bullying with the use of digital technologies, and that it can take place on social media, messaging platforms, gaming platforms, and mobile phones. It is repeated behavior aimed at scaring, angering, or shaming those who are targeted. And apparently, social media sites and apps are the most common digital forms of cyberbullying, with Instagram being a social media platform that many students had experienced being bullied on. And cyberbullying itself has 6 different forms. The first one is creating a fake profile and use it to annoy or upset another person, sending a nasty message either privately or publicly to somebody they know offline. The third one is doing something to subtly annoy somebody they didn't like online, or sharing something online that openly mocks another person, or trolling somebody in an online game. And the last one, sending a screenshot of someone's status or photo to laugh at them in the group chat. And probably we are not aware that we have done it before. Some samples of the cyberbullying, we have few case studies for hate comments. So there's a Nurul Akmal case. There's a body shaming case of Indonesian lifter athlete, which was famous a few weeks ago. So during her landing from Tokyo, she received a hate comment from someone mocking her by saying paling kurus, or in English, the slimmest one. We also have Michelle Halim case. So in June 2021, an Indonesian influencer mocks Victoria's Secret Collective, which is a platform to build a new, deeper relationship with all women through several business partnerships and initiatives from collaborations of women across various backgrounds. And in her opinion, the new concept is not compatible with the standard of beauty from a model. So she posted a nasty message on her Instagram story. But on the other hand, we also have opportunities which arise through the development of social media, such as positive social campaigns. So we have Sarah Ayu and Titan Tyra. So both of them are young female influencers who bring up body positivity campaigns to break stigmas. On the other hand, we also have Jovia Adiguna, which is an Indonesian influencer, queer icon, which actively promotes to break stigmas against the dressing norms in Indonesia. And through his social media channels, he creates positive content and encourages his young followers to be more tolerant. In addition, there is a rise of social media, social cause platforms, which capitalize the opportunities from social media. So a lot of youths are taking opportunities of our digital society to create the betterment for the society itself. They become the founders of platforms to tackle social issues around them. We have a few of them. One of them is Bye Bye Plastic Bags. It is a non-profit organization founded in Bali, aimed to create a world free of plastic bags through the youth empowerment, educations, campaign, and political meetings. And the team has been launched in over 50 locations across all continents around the globe. We also have the Young Seekers. There's a regional community focused to build cross-border competencies and interpersonal soft skills of Asian youths. It is the first and the only Southeast Asia-based nonprofit with the China and Asian angle or perspective. We also have Women Beyond, which is a nonprofit organization aiming to nurture, empower, and equalize women leaders, which I co-founded with a few of my colleagues. So given the challenges and the opportunities presented earlier, the question is what we can do as youth. So there's a continuous cycle of activities which we can do to create a more ethical impact, which is awareness, advocacy, and actions. Awareness means being mindful of the current challenges and opportunities. Advocacy means like being able to inform, influence, and inspire others. Action means to generate actions and deliver impact, such as ethical networking. So deep dive into each of these actions. Awareness. Next slide. There's an exploratory study which was conducted to examine the social media usage and the implications for personal privacy. And from that study, results indicated that if users of these networks pay attention to privacy settings and the type of information shared and adhere to the universal fundamental moral values such as mutual respect and kindness, many privacy and unethical issues can be avoided. So the point is here is just by being aware of the ethical rules, many privacy and unethical issues can be avoided. The second one related to advocacy, the best way to explain this is to give examples. So here I have two examples. One of them is Pak Imadi Adi Arsana, which is a public figure, lecturer at UGM, and also educational content creator. And also we have Danang Girisadewa, which is a YouTube content creator. So both of them actually utilize their social media accounts to create a good ethical content and positive influences to their audiences and encourage the others to do the same thing. And the third one is actions. So before we make any actions in our social media platforms, we must ask ourselves these following guidelines. The first one is to be fair and prudent. Second one, avoid deceptions. And the third one, maintain dignity and respect, eschew secrecy, and ask ourselves, is it reversible? How would you feel on the receiving end of the message before we send a message in social media? Be transparent, clearly identify, is it personal speech or opinion, or is it an opinion as the representative of an organization? Always have a rational analysis or baseline for every argument that you make. Emphasize the clarity, disclose all of the information that you have, verify the sources and data, establish responsibility, examine intentions, encourage the good, and the last one, being consistent, because it can build trust over time. So thank you. That wraps up my presentations, and I will hand it over to Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. So I really appreciated the fact that you were talking about downside, as well as upsides. So, and then you were talking about actions as we go through. How confident are you that students are able to manage these downsides and upsides? Or how confident are you that students are able to really take actions on their own?
Yep. Thank you so much for the questions, Ms. Bob. So I think, personally speaking, whether students are confident or not, it depends on the perspective of the youth itself. But for me personally, I see it as a demand from the digital world that youth have to fit into the trends of the social media nowadays. So because of that push, because of that trends, we need to be able to capitalize the opportunities rather than focusing on the challenges presented earlier. So my point is here is that we should actually focus on capitalizing the opportunities and prevent or minimize at least the challenges for such as the hackings and also the cyberbullying that can be presented by doing the continuous cycle of actions, which I have already presented: being aware, being mindful, and be sharing or informing and being an advocate of ethical decisions, and lastly, giving actions to the society.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me, Frida, do you have any question you'd like to jump in with? If not, I'd like to go to the panelists to see if they have a question for Erica, because basically you're representing the next generation, and we would like to come back to you. That's what this webinar is for. Frida, anything from your side? If not, I'll ask one of the panelists. I'll open it to the panelists to ask a question for Erica.
Yes, Dr. Bob, thank you. I actually have one question for Lesmana. So there has been a concern about the process of translating social media activism to real action. The question is, in what ways can we mitigate the problem of slacktivism? Thank you, Ms. Erica.
Slacktivism, nice, interesting word.
Yes, it's an interesting terms. So actually, we need to understand first what is the slacktivism before we dive into the key actions, right? So the United Nations actually defines the slacktivism as when people support a cause by performing simple measures, but are not necessarily engaged or devoted to making a change. I think in this perspective, the social media itself is just an enabler of doing the slacktivism. The real root cause is that the biological behavior of human or youth itself. So the question now is that how we as youth can encourage others to do real actions instead of just probably giving some likes or just thumbs up on our social media platforms. Like the easiest one is probably by giving examples. So there's a case of Greta Thunberg. So she did, because of her passions of the climate change, she did real actions to skip schools and go in a strike against the climate change. So I think this kind of actions, this kind of attitude actually encourage others to do the same thing. And I believe that we as youth have to give examples to others rather than just probably giving some likes on the social media.
Frida, you have a second question. Thank you, Erica.
Yes, understood. That's all. I don't have any further follow-up questions. If you may jump to the panels, Dr. Bob.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, now we're open to dialogue with those of you who are dialing in. We know that there are many of you, so it can't be as interactive as we'd like to have. And so we'd like to come to, what we'll do is we'll give each of our speakers a chance to answer a question from the audience. So do we have anything so far from Dr. Nguyen? Dr. Nguyen, then let me ask. Let me ask the question. We've seen the sort of international level, the national level, the legal level first. Then we went to the company level. Then we go to the student level.
Right.
From what you've seen, and particularly just finishing off with Erica's presentation of the things she's doing and interested in, what do you see as the importance of youth for adopting ethics and speaking up? How important is this for ASEAN?
I think this is a very big question to answer and quite complex, difficult to answer that. My presentation is about from the government perspective. Often the government try, and actually from the Asian culture, often the government try to push and ask the citizen to follow, to obey the policies they push to impose on the society. And but I think, unlike the last presentation from the Erica, I think that the EU should be more. I think the government should provide listen more about the EU's opinion, because now the EU, they listen to each other on the social media platform more than from the government on the policy. I think, our generation is often work with the government, and we often obey and follow the policy guided by the government. But now the East, like Erica, the social, and often the majority of the audience in this webinar are students, and they often they communicate more often with each other, rather than with the official from the government. So I think the government should listen more. They provide some kind of information. They listen from the social media and to listen to understand the thinking, the wish from the youth, more from the official channel like the television or the other thing. Yeah, I think social media now they take more, they provide more value to the government rather than the traditional media channel like the television, and newspaper. Yeah, I think so.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. Do we have as we move on with the panel? Do we have a question for Kelly Forbes from the audience?
Yes, Dr. Bob, we have the questions for Ms. Forbes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so Ms. Forbes previously explained about how we should trust the artificial intelligence because it's unstoppable and we have to jump with that sooner or later. So the questions for Ms. Forbes is, have any of your studies about that material we have explained found a way to substantially respond to Stephen Hawking's prediction against the development and use of artificial intelligence?
I lost you. Did you catch it?
Did you catch it, Ms.
That was a very long question.
Yeah, so sorry. The question, just to clarify, the question is around with our study for the Institute, we were able to identify ways to mitigate risks. Is that?
Yeah, how you, with your studies and your findings, how you can respond substantially to Stephen Hawking's predictions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. So,
yes,
I think the short answer is yes. We've recently published our latest report on these challenges, and that was the result of our research in the last year, where we have made an assessment against those principles which I've presented earlier today around, and privacy is one of them, which countries have put forward in their frameworks and approaches to ethics of AI. And we have actually reached out to industry and test those principles against their practices. So we reach out to ask what the definition mean for them, how are they implementing those changes, and how do the day-to-day actually responds to what we have in theory. And that is where also we have a large gap where Dr. Run actually explained on that as well, between theory and practice. And the challenge is that in practice, a lot of these principles are very, very difficult to implement. The theory is there, but if I walk you through, for example, the principle of privacy, there are very practical challenges for AI on that. So, and one of them is the challenge around, we all know that we would like to build systems and have systems running that we can avoid bias. We know that there has been some systems in place from large tech companies that discriminate against women, discriminate against certain racial and other elements in general. And so we would like to have systems that can bring a certain element of equality and a fair approach to this. Now, our challenge is that to be able to avoid bias, we actually need to look into the data that we have put into these systems. Now, there's a whole history of data in the world where we have seen discrimination and we have seen how that plays out. And now we're feeding that into the system. So we need, and that is why it's very crucial for the conversation around regulation and these approaches, is that we need a balance. And that balance can only be achieved if we have interdisciplinary collaboration. So we cannot have just regulators working on that on their own, and we cannot have technologists just building this world on their own. So they need to talk to each other, and that's what we have attempted to do with our last study last year, which is reaching out to them and thinking about how are they actually implementing this, what privacy means for them, and where the challenges are, and so on. And we have seen very practical concerns and difficulties that they actually have to implement that.
Kelly, let me ask you something. You've got a legal background, but at the same time, you've got this organization and you're doing studies. So on one hand, you've got the law, right? You're going to go try to get laws passed. But it's often very difficult to have a law that can catch up with technology. On the other hand, you're doing a lot of advocacy. You're publishing papers and you're saying we should be able to do things. What would you say is your chief focus right now? Is it more on the legal side, or is it more on the advocacy side to try to influence governments and companies, for example, as you were saying, to open up the technology?
Great question, Bob. So, and I think it's very much on that balance. So we have law, we have a lot of existing law that actually applies to AI, and that on an international level and on a local level. So we have a lot of laws, for example, around human rights. And, you know, in our conversation here, a few speakers have touched on human rights. Could that be the answer, the foundation for a lot of our concerns? And although that is a great start, we also must be mindful that human rights also have a very different interpretation for each country. Most countries, many countries are not signatories to the International Agreement on Human Rights. And so what the world is attempting right now, and I sort of attempted to walk that through my presentation, which was there is this legal space where we have agreements and we have existing laws that can tap into these concerns, but there is a gap. And where there is that gap, we have ethical frameworks. So these are principles that countries have, international organizations now, and they are hopefully providing a guideline for the industry about how they need to walk this path, right? Now, most of everyone here might agree with me that we're most likely are going to see more and more regulation on this as well. So, you know, we're just starting to tap into that space now. We are going to see more changes on that end. And the earlier organizations and, you know, universities, everyone can prepare for this change with the principles. I mean, the best that this transition is going to play out.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Pip, you were was talking with us about the world of work and the world of companies, and it's a vast area because companies are producing the technological applications as well as trying to manage how you organize a company and what about the people in the company. Frida, do you have a question for Philippa Penfold, please?
Yes, Dr. Bob. The questions comes from the YouTube audience. They ask your opinion regarding will human resource is bound to obsolescence because of the digitalizations in the companies or services?
Great question.
Yeah, the simple answer is no, but there is a caveat. So we're seeing a couple of changes, a couple of dynamics that will have an impact on whether human resources will become obsolete with or without technology. First of all, the pandemic has created a far more human-centric HR, human resources department, and companies. We've seen the companies that have done well are ones where leadership put empathy and a focus on the humans in their workforce, not just their labour, or as they're often called, talents. But putting those people first, they've done a lot better and coming out of the pandemic. We've also seen that to be able to complement technology, people need human skills in whether it's complex thinking or empathy and creativity. These certainly cannot be replaced anytime soon, and they feature very strongly in the human resource department, or at least they should feature very strongly in the human resource department. But as we all know, and as anyone who works in HR is fully aware, we are not protected by the digitalization and how technology is influencing our work, how we work. One of the great sayings, and it's not mine, but I do agree with it. It said, you won't necessarily lose your job wholesale to an artificial intelligence, but unless you can work with artificial intelligence, you will lose your job. So I think the obsolescence is not necessarily for the function. I think we are seeing an evolution of the function. I think the evolution has been accelerated in different ways by the pandemic. I do fear that the movement, when we reach that tipping point of the majority of ASEAN companies adopting artificial intelligence. We know we saw 83% are in early stage. If HR are not ready to support their organizations moving forward, we're going to be caught out. It'll feel very much like the pandemic again, where we're learning something very, very quickly and, let's face it, making it up as we go along. And while, you know, that's understandable for that pandemic, it's not a good excuse in AI, because we know it is coming and we know that the technology is changing how we work. So I don't think we will become obsolescent. People who do not understand technology, who cannot work with technology effectively, will become obsolete in that specific area. They'll have to go and find something else to do. But I don't believe HR will become obsolete. Just continue to evolve. Great question.
Thank you. Thank you, Philippa. Okay, and now we go to the world of the university, the teaching, the research, etc. Can you do you have a question for Dr. Ranvang, please?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bob. So
Yes.
we also have the questions for Dr. Ranvang from our YouTube audience. The question is, how national or school provide digital literacy in education system to develop digital skill with ethics and using technology?
Yes, I just have an example in our university. Digital literature is mandatory for freshmen, so 2 courses. So we have a 8 course for requirement to take the course. So we just 2 of them course is digital literature course here, and then also the other, just another thing, we just have some programming course too, and the other one is big data with statistics, something like that, linear regression. Some course is also they just a requirement for this. So in university, we have 4 courses for digital literature and the AI course here. So in Korea, many universities have similar to our curriculum in freshman and sophomore course. They already have one. And then our country have some AI graduate school, just a specific specialized AI graduate school is we already select top 11 school here. So we already just have a good education in here.
Okay, thank you. And then to Erica, student to student, you have a question, Frida?
Yes, Dr. Bob.
Okay.
The question to Ms. Lesmana is, can you share to us the boundaries between unethical and ethical standards in engaging ourselves in social media, specifically in the 21st century? How do we capitalize these opportunities in engaging in social media?
Okay, thank you so much. That's a really good questions. And before I make the presentation, I asked myself actually like, what is the actual guidelines of doing the ethical networking on social media? Clearly, there's no explicit guidelines that we can actually find, but what I can actually find is that by asking ourselves the following guidelines, which I have already presented earlier: be fair and be prudent, avoid deceptions, be transparent, and so on and so forth. It can be clear determinations of whether we can actually do this or not doing this. So ask yourself, ask ourselves these following guidelines, and I hope it can help you to make ethical decisions in social networking. And moving on to this, I think there are 2 questions, right? Like, how do we capitalize the opportunities in engaging in social media? A lot of examples of the youth capitalizing or actually exploring the potentials of social media arise in the internet. For instance, we have a lot of YouTubers like coming from a poor economic background, they don't have enough equipment, they don't have enough internet connections, but they don't give up on themselves, right? They are creative, they use their creativity to create contents, and it actually it is actually good or clear content for the audiences. So my point is that we as youth, we don't have to feel small, or we don't have to feel like we don't have a role in this era or in these trends, but we can actually do something, be creative, and don't give up. Yeah, that's my point. Thank you.
Let me come back from what we were talking about. Students should have ethical training as well as knowing more about the technologies. So Dr. Van Beek said that yes, students should have this. Philippa, in companies, do you think employees should be trained? Well, they'll be trained in the technology, but should they be trained in the ethical aspects of technology? Should this be a sort of requirement? What do you think?
Yeah, personally, I think yes. If we go back to the question that was asked after my presentation, and I mentioned the ability to challenge artificial intelligence, not just the channel to do so, but the capability to do so. Understanding what it is that you are challenging and how. It has to be some type of framework, and often it is an ethical, framework or principles upon which that company or we were able to make that challenge. I think people need a broader understanding of how it impacts and the choices that are made and that they are making through the use, either as managers, as business making choices. So we've got multiple things in the workplace. While we can all be trained from an ethical point of view or participate. In fact, just a side note, it's very interesting to see that ethics training is actually quite new in the technology space. If you're undergoing a Bachelor of Computer Science or any of the computer engineering styles, ethics is not a common subject. It is more now than it was, but there's a great debate between Microsoft and Yuval Harari some time ago around this very issue. So, it is not just a technology thing, it is an everyone thing. But in the business, we need to think about it both as the decision makers and the users. So what principles and standards are companies trying to embrace to be able to move forward with technology? What are they using as their basis for decision or choice about which technology to bring in or not? I find most business leaders don't have the skill set to be able to answer that both from a technical and an ethical point of view. They do it from a profit imperative. Does the technology enable efficiency, make more money, whatever it is? But the ethical and the technical and how it interacts, the technological question is usually left to, sadly, IT. This is also a huge white space for HR. HR should be promoting the ethical debate. In my early career in HR, a few decades ago, there was the time when values were very big. Everyone was working on their mission, vision, and values. And companies and HR people in companies were doing workshops to develop what those values looked like. They still happen in pockets today. But today, the most important thing today is actually developing a set of guidelines or a set of values that the company wishes to embrace, both from the technology it decides to use and the data that feeds it. So we cannot make an ethical decision or recommendation about technology without understanding the data implications and vice versa. They're interdependent and inseparable, but we must understand separate components to be able to make a solid argument. So I think that the easy answer is yes, but there are different nuances, and in my mind, HR. There is that white space to own, and I would love to see HR stepping up and actually being able to bridge the gap between the ethics and values of an organization alongside its technology use and the ethical debate around data and other things within that company.
I think that's why we're moving from HR to human development, because ethics is more clearly part of it.
Definitely.
I'm going to take a question from the audience here and I'm going to interpret it for any panelists that want to answer or give their view. So the question really is, who's to blame when something goes wrong, like with AI or other technology? It reminds me of a big debate going on in the United States about guns. You know, there are people obviously against having guns for everybody, and there are people who defend having guns. And the people who defend having guns says, it's not the gun that kills people, it's people that use the gun that kill people. Can we say this about AI? In other words, this week, the big debate is in China is the government is limiting the use of video games for children under 18 to 90 minutes per day. So who's responsible for the ethical use of technology? Is it the country that makes the laws? This is clearly what we're seeing in China, and that's where the debate is coming from. Is it the company that's letting the profit motive go beyond what's good for people? Is it the people themselves that don't have enough ethics to be able to manage themselves? This is a fundamental question, and and I'd like to invite the panelists, any of you who want to jump in, to give your point of view. Open to you. Who would like to say something?
Can I just jump into that? Thanks, Bob. That's a very, very good question. And I think the short answer is that everyone is trying to find the right answer to that. But I would probably say that this is going to be a balance of liability that we're going to see playing out. The law is still catching up with these questions themselves. So, you know, about 2 years ago, we had the first case of a pedestrian being killed by an AI, a self-driving car. Right. And it was the first time that we had to really debate with that question. Who is liable here? Is it the company that made the car? Is the person that was sitting, behind the wheel, but wasn't really driving, right? Who has the responsibility? And the reality is that, the legal system is still trying to balance with all these questions. We also had recently a very large case in Australia, which, perhaps a lot of you are familiar with, called RoboDebt, where the government implemented AI in social services, and the system was running for a few years, making very serious inconsistencies and really harming a lot of people's lives. And at the end of the day, then the question, it was the sort of first really legal case here in Australia where they had to ask that question: is it, the company that sold that system to the Australian government, or was it the government that had a duty of care with this, citizens where they were implementing that system? And the result of that was a very, very large settlement where, the Australian government had to come to terms with how to essentially make up to that failure there in implementing that system, right? Yes, correct. It was a very, very light settlement, and I think that was really interesting because a large part of our work with the Institute is showing that if you can build trust into these systems, you're also encouraging innovation in the right way. Yeah. And the opposite is also true. If you're only implementing AI without really checking the consequences or having people in place that understand these systems, then you're doing the exact opposite, because it's going to cost a lot more to remediate and really address those challenges later on. So I'll stop there and let the other panelists jump in.
Thanks for your point of view, Kelly. Anybody else like to jump in? No? Okay.
Excuse me, sorry, I just want to say that I was hoping that Dr. Baik or Dr. Nguyen might have something I'm interested to hear from them, but I did want to just raise that we are living in the Wild West of artificial intelligence in many ways. Regulation is, to all intents and purposes in many jurisdictions, just a good idea. And there is already a lot of artificial intelligence tools out there that have been built without any guidance, any standards, any principles. So as we move into a more regulated environment where governments and companies and industry bodies dictate, and there becomes a set of standards that evolves as accepted across the board, there will be a huge cleanup that is needed from a lot of the tools that are out there that don't comply with any of these things. So there's some very dangerous ones out there right now. So I think what we need to think about is not just how do we move forward, what should be our go forward, but how do we look back and clean up what we've got so that as we move forward, we've got tools we can trust.
Felipe, so basically you're saying the reality is, guys, given the situation of AI today, nobody's responsible. It just happens. And then, I mean, it reminds me of what, I don't know if you saw this film, The Big Short, about the 2008 crash. How many bankers actually went to jail? There was only one guy in Switzerland, in Belgium or something, that went to jail because of all of the unethical practices of banking and in property markets. Well, I think we're out of time. So let me just try to summarize briefly what we've covered. And I'd like to mention to everybody here watching this that you've seen that we've had slides, and sometimes people say you shouldn't use PowerPoint. But in a question like this, there is so much information and it's so complex that I really welcome the fact that all of our speakers presented slides, which you can then get and look at because they're very useful in guidance for what your thinking might be. Also, that you can also get a recording, or if you have friends that couldn't make it, we have somebody that was calling in that just contacted me from the US, but it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. So he said, I'm going to bed, but I'll get the recording. So you can get the recording as well. What we see is that in the case of technology, so we're talking about ethics in society, and we've had, this is the fourth type of topic. When it comes to ethics of technology, there are many, many ethical issues. And what we've seen is that ASEAN is in a specific position. In a sense, the hard side of technology is access to technology, research and invention. So it's not like we're saying that you have to stop technology. We're not going to stop technology, but it's a question of how do you actually start to shape it so that there is responsible use of technology. That comes to the soft power side of it, which is because ASEAN is a bottom-up process, unlike the European Union, you have to go and ask the countries, and then you have to get the countries to agree. And in many cases, the countries either don't know, as we've seen in terms of the capability, or they may very, very much disagree because there's already disagreement on human rights issues, as we've seen within ASEAN. Some people sign the human rights declarations, some people don't sign everything in the declarations. So it's highly diverse, but it seems that it is possible because we're seeing some countries, and particularly if you're based on technology, if you're a small country, if you have money that you can invest, and that's the case of Singapore, you can see that they're actually sorting out some of these issues of technology and starting to pass laws, as well as countries outside of strict ASEAN, Asia Pacific, for example, in Australia, New Zealand, we see these laws becoming important. But the fact is that there is a huge amount of power involved in the technology, how it's created, where it's created, how it's used, and which companies are actually able to use it. So the idea, as I said, is not to stop, but to manage technology. And I think what I've heard from the different speakers is that the key hope for ASEAN and the way forward is, number one, requiring that there should be transparency in how it's used. We don't see the code that is used in when we use our mobile phone, and we're using AI for everything today. So we don't see the code, but we have to make sure that there is transparency, that it's possible for people to see what's actually going on, what are the assumptions built in to these systems, and what are the possible negative effects. The second thing that came out strongly, I thought, from different aspects, but particularly from the students, is that you need to have a voice. In other words, if something is going on, and Erica's case of cyberbullying was a good example. If something's going on, people have to speak up, and we have to be trained and be prepared to speak up, even though the space is not necessarily there. You're not necessarily invited. So I think transparency and voice, having a voice in what's going on, is really probably the ethical hope that in ASEAN, and actually I am hopeful, and we can see this from how students are using it, that there is a hope that ASEAN will be not just a follower, even though in terms of the technology, we're already starting to take leadership in certain areas as well in the use of technology, but also a leader in terms of the ethical use and the proper and responsible use of ethics in technology. With that, it's obviously an ongoing story. I talked about the China news this week. Next week, what will be the news? We don't know, but it will be continuing to pose challenges for all of us. And I'd like to thank our speakers for preparing this and for sharing your expertise on this. It was very, very interesting to hear the different perspectives. And I'd like to thank the audience also for your questions and for just making the effort and taking the time to dial in. Now I turn it back over to our Master of Ceremonies.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bob, for the very clear and concise summary for our webinar today. And I also would like to thank all of our panel speakers for the materials they have shared and the insights and their opinion that they have shared to us all. And of course, also to the audience that have participated in this webinar and asked very good questions. One more thing that I want to say is a disclaimer that the opinions expressed in a webinar are those of the authors only and may not necessarily represent the views of the organizing agencies and or any other ASEAN institutions or bodies. All right, thank you very much. I think that's all for our webinar today. Thank you once again for joining us. And I would like to say very big thanks to our moderator for moderate all of the webinar, the panel discussion. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Bob Audrey. Thank you so much once again, everyone. My name is Frida Angelina, and yeah, I'm signing out. Thank you, everyone.